Welcome back to the Go on the Match podcast. Today I'm joined by The Guardian's Daniel Harris. Daniel is a football writer for The Guardian and a match-going Man United fan, and has written 2 books on following United through the years. Daniel, thanks for giving me time today, mate, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Okay, so I want you to take us back to your childhood and following United. Where were you born and how did your love for Man United begin?
So I was born in London, but my dad is from Cheetham Hill in Manchester. And his dad has a season ticket at Old Trafford in the 40s and 50s. So he passed it on to my dad, and my dad passed it on to me. And yeah, I mean, how it's nothing really special, how these things usually work. And I was, I guess, obsessed with all sport, but football in particular, for as long as I can remember. I was born in 1979. And there are pictures of me in a red and white baby grow watching United, or not watching United, lose the cup final to Arsenal. And I can remember, I think the first games I can remember watching and happening are in 1983 when I was 4. So yeah, it's been there. It's always been there, and I guess it will always be there.
Yeah. So, I mean, every episode I've done, I've kind of touched on, when you go to your first match and walking up the stairs and you see in the pitch, obviously, if you're travelling from London like yourself going to Old Trafford, that must have been, obviously, you're going to be going to the matches. You must have been like that excited as a kid going. But was there any sort of players that you were like particularly interested in, getting off your seat and watching that one player or those 2 players?
Well, watching United in the 80s, it was all about Brian Robson. My parents still take the piss out of me that when I was a kid, I used to complain that they called me Daniel and why didn't they call me Brian with a Y? The 80s for United was, there were some other great players, like Norman Whiteside was a great player and a hero, Mark Hughes, Paul McGrath, but it was all about Brian Robson. And I remember there was one day, and it's the only time I've ever cried when United lost the game. United played West Ham, and Robson scored, and United went 1-0 up. Then Robson equalised. Then and United won. I should probably give a bit of a scene, actually. United haven't won the league since 1968, and they won the first 10 games of the season. And I don't think anyone's done that since. And I went to my first game. It was one of those 10, and then United played West Ham. And I remember the day. It was the 1st of February, and United go 1-0 up with a goal from Robson, and then West Ham equalise. Robson goes off with a dislocated shoulder. United lose. Basically, the league's gone, and Liverpool end up winning the double. And that afternoon is basically it's a decade in an afternoon now. Yeah. And it was all about Brian Robson. And I think that people today, when they talk about the great midfielders, a lot of people have forgotten how good Brian Robson was. Paul Gascoigne always used to refer to him as the greatest player in the world. And I remember, I think it was 87. There was a match to mark the centenary of the FA. Maybe it was a little bit later, and it was an England team against the rest of the world. And Maradona was there, and Brian Robson absolutely dominated that game. I think the Football League won 3-0. I think. Yeah. I think Robson scored and Whiteside scored. It was basically United 3, the rest of the world 0. That was how we looked at it in those days. Any port in a storm, basically. But it was all about Brian Robson. Brian Robson had incredible technical ability, incredible drive. He scored goals. He had, the most obvious comparison is Roy Keane, because they both played for United, but they were that same kind of player. It doesn't exist so much anymore. And I guess of those 2, I would say that I'm a bit young to really evaluate Brian Robson in the way that I can evaluate Keane, because he'd signed for United. We signed for United when I was 2, and so even when I was old enough to like football and go to the game and watch the game, I was a bit young to appreciate football in a particularly detailed way, obviously. But there are very few people that saw Robson and Keane that will tell you that Keane was a better player. So maybe Keane's passing was better, but as an all-round footballer, I would say that Robson's better. And then you kind of had late-era Robson in sort of as he was slowing down, where he would just absolutely plough through people and get a benevolent pat on the head from the referee, because he was Brian Robson, and everyone knew that Brian Robson could do what he wanted because he was Brian Robson. So I had a hamster called Robbo, actually, after Brian Robson. And in true Brian Robson style, he did not last that long before. It wasn't the dislocated shoulder that got him, ultimately, it was death. But it came very quickly, and I replaced him with a hamster called Sparky, who was quite a lot more robust.
The irony there. So when you go into your first games, is there anything you like touching back on it now, you can remember stands out from, that you...
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because my parents, or even now, regret. I remember they went to the in the 1983 Cup final, went to a replay, and I'm Jewish, so my parents go quite into keeping the laws of Judaism. So we go to football on Saturdays, and then the 83 Cup final goes to a replay. And my parents went, and they opted not to take me. I got a rosette, still got it somewhere, fuckers. And United won 4-0. My parents, they sort of regretted not taking me, and then. A couple of years later, United got to the cup final, and in those days, like the team that was in the cup final would rest loads of players, obviously, in the final league game. Nowadays, kind of often the teams that are competing in the cup final are also still competing for the league because, I mean, I guess the power and the money have become centralised more. But United played Watford away in the last league game before the cup final, and then my dad sneaked off, went without telling me, and United got whacked 5-1. And when he came back, I was still pissed off they hadn't taken me to the game. So quite soon, at the beginning of the next season, we went to United played West Ham on Bank Holiday Monday. And West Ham were really good that year. They came fourth, and so they came third. Not United came fourth. West Ham came third, and on the final day of the season, Liverpool, Everton, and West Ham were still in with a chance of winning the league, which I don't think is something that has happened since, where three teams can still do it on the final day. And they just signed Frank McAvenny, and they had McAvenny and Cottee up front, and they had Alan Devonshire. They're a good team, and United beat them 2-0 quite easily. And I guess the thing I remember mainly is my dad used to like singing "Oh Frankie, Frankie" Stapleton, and I remember when the crowd started up that one, my dad was like elbowing me and saying, "Have a listen to this." But otherwise, I think noticing the stuff that's going on at the game beyond the football escaped me completely.
Yeah,
I was just totally obsessed enthralled to the football. Obviously, everyone remembers the first sight of the green. Doesn't need no one who's been to a football match needs me to tell them about the green. And I mean, I still love it now. I'm 41. But yeah, the green. And I remember the football. I remember Jesper Olsen running around most of the West Ham team and missing a sitter, which is sort of Jesper Olsen's United career in portrait. And I think it was 0-0 at half time, and then Strachan and Hughes scored for United, and United won 2-0. And United were top of the league, where they stayed more or less until Robson got injured, and the board sold Hughes to Barcelona midway through the season, and he didn't really want to go. And he wasn't really the same after that. And Ron Atkinson was manager of United at the time, I think he'd already bought Alan Brazil, who was rubbish. And then he spent the rest of the Hughes money he got went on Peter Davenport, who a winner at Anfield aside. And I think that was the season. Was it Anfield? He scored the winner. No, maybe he scored the winner at Old Trafford, but definitely a winner against Liverpool. And Terry Gibson, who played centre forward for United, yet managed to score more goals against United than he did for, which is an incredible piece of information, really. But he wasted that money, and Atkinson was gone not much more than a year later.
So, with you going to the matches now, obviously we're working on The Guardian. I've had James Pearce, works for The Athletic, on to do Liverpool a couple of episodes ago. When you're going now as a fan, do you find it quite hard or quite difficult to kind of have you take your professional hat off sort of thing and just focus on the match as a fan?
I mean, sort of. Like I'd say the actual routine or process of going to the game with my mates, my dad, whoever I'm going with, is obviously just a treat, a pleasure, and one that we all appreciate so much more now that we're not able to do it. At the game, I mean, you try and absorb yourself in the game as a supporter as much as you can. I mean, I'm as much of a balloon, dickhead, whatever word you want to use, as everyone else who's there. Yeah. I'm as ill, poorly as all the other people that are obsessed with this shit. But I'm not going to lie, I do make notes. Because I'm not sure when I'm not a reporter, so I don't go to games and write reports, and I definitely would not like to do that.
Yeah.
Because this is a pleasure, a passion, a lifestyle, all of those things. And the idea of going to watch a team that isn't United on a reg or going to watch a team that isn't United when United are playing makes me like inspires a physical reaction in me. Like I won't do that. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
But I do write about United and I do think about United and a lot. So I mean, this is not going to be news to anyone who's listening to this, I'm sure. So yeah, when things happen in the game, I make notes, and that is ultimately the price that you pay, that not me, just anyone pays for having a job that is also a pleasure, something that you love. So even if I never wrote about football, even if I didn't like football, but I was a writer, I would always be at work in one way or another. Like I'm always making notes about something because you have a thought and you kind of at some point rely on yourself to remember it until you can be fucked to write it down. But it doesn't take very many lost thoughts for you to never, ever rely on your memory in that way.
Yeah.
So, to that extent, I'm always at work. I'm always tapping at my phone to the extent where I've got RSI in my hand at the moment from constant that. So, yeah. So I try my best to experience the game in the way that I would always experience it, as in I'm not going to be making like there's not United aren't going to score, and my mates or the randoms are going to be hugging over there, falling over the rows, and I'm going to be like, well, actually, but yeah, I do record shit. It's true.
So you wrote 2 books on United. So On the Road, A Journey Through the Season, which was published in 2010, and The Promised Land, published in 2013. What was the drive for writing those books? Is that something you'd always knew you were going to do?
I always wanted to write books. I don't think anyone that went to school with me would be particularly surprised by what I do, because I was kind of always, I was mainly at school, I was mainly into being a knobhead, but I was also into football and words and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The first book came about because I was kind of really just starting out as a football writer at that point, and I was writing for Eurosport. I'd done a few pieces, not Eurosport, ESPN. I'd done a few pieces for them, and they asked me to write a weekly column, and we decided that the weekly column was going to be about following United about. So I was doing them, and then in the course of doing them, I thought it'd be good to put these into a book. Unfortunately, they completely bollocked me by managing to not win the league that season. They were going 4 in a row, and truth is actually it was Fergie who made a bollocks of it that season, and they also got completely screwed by the refs, which is not an excuse at all. You have to be good enough to win whatever the refs do. But also one of the reasons I'm absolutely certain, I'm not accusing the refs of anything here, but early in the season, Fergie laid into Alan Wiley for being unfit, and he was obviously amazing at playing people, but that felt like an error when he did it, because if you belong to this body who are getting it from all sides, and this is why the responsibility for VAR is all the dickheads that don't understand that referees are capable of making mistakes, who are adults who can't get over the result of a football match for hours, days, weeks afterwards.
Yeah.
That's why we have the current mess that we've got, because people refuse to accept the fact that referees make mistakes, and they should be adult enough and human enough to just get on with it. But anyway, so Fergie accused Alan Wiley of being fat and unfit. If you belong to this very small body in a huge industry of people who everyone's always slagging off, and basically the biggest man in that industry, this is one of your number in public, subconsciously, that is going to put you in a situation where if there's a marginal call, where are you going? And I don't say that at all as a criticism of the referees. Like, I don't think the referee is particularly good, but I know that refereeing is really difficult.
Yeah.
And if they get it wrong, they're not trying to get it wrong on purpose. But the idea that they watch all the football that we watch, they read the papers that we watch, they love the game, they think about the game, and they also have personal relationships with so many of the people involved in the game. If we're saying that no decision that they make is affected by their personal relationships, then we're idiots. Of course that's the case. And the quantity of decisions that went against United in that season was exceptional. So, yeah, which is a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I decided to do the book. I guess I was hoping at the time it looked like United were going to win a 4th title in a row, and were actually pretty well set to win the Champions League as well, because Mourinho's in there had done, and the Icelandic ash cloud had combined. I don't know how Mourinho arranged that ash cloud, but it was when he was still at his dastardly best, and none of that shit was beyond him. But they arranged for Barcelona to lose. So, and United had not been able to beat Barcelona in 2009. But in 2010, there was no Barcelona, and then Rooney got injured against Bayern Munich, and they managed to not win the European Cup either. And that was actually kind of when people evaluate the career of Wayne Rooney, I think sometimes people feel like Wayne Rooney disappointed them a little bit, because when he broke through in 2004, he looked like he was going to be one of the greatest players we'd ever seen. And he settled for being one of the greatest players of his generation, ultimately. And so that was kind of a disappointment for some people. But I think it's important to note when we're looking at Wayne Rooney like that there were two occasions in his career when it looked like he was going to upend everything by himself, and he got injured both times. In Euro 2004, when he was incredible, and England looked like they had a really good chance of winning it. And I mean, they lost on penalties to Portugal. He then lost to Greece. England with Wayne Rooney probably beat Portugal and probably beat Greece. But he got injured then. And in 2010, when he was in probably the greatest form of his career, he got injured, and United managed to not win the league and not win the Champions League in his absence. So, yeah, that was how I did the first book. And the treble book was just, I guess, an idea for a book. And the book got sold, and was lucky enough to do the book. Although I guess the difficulty with that book was that because I pitched it at the time when I pitched it, and it had to be out for Christmas. So I ended up having to write that book in about 6 weeks, which is not a course of action I would recommend to anyone. I would say it's not a bad way of doing a first draft of a book, because when you're forced to work on something for that number of hours, you see connections that you wouldn't otherwise have seen, because there's nothing else going on in your head apart from writing that book, because you're doing like 10 till 4 in the morning every night. But it would have been nice to have had some time subsequently to refine it. Like, you would then have to be nice to have a month or two after that. But yeah, that was how I did those books. But ultimately, couldn't bitch about getting to write a book about United winning the treble season. That was, I mean, is an honour and a privilege, and something that you need to, if you're someone who gets to do this stuff that you like, something that you should never forget.
Yeah. So, kind of coming away from the match day now, I wanted to ask a few specific questions on the football club. So I know United brought in a singing section, or I'm not too sure if I'm allowed to call it a singing section as such. I've been told off by a few United fans in the past about that. But they brought that in at Old Trafford. Do you think that helps the atmosphere?
So my first season ticket at Old Trafford was in the original singing section. It was in 2000, I think I got it. And it wasn't bad up there, but the error that they made was they stuck it in the top tier of the Stretford end, and that's not, you need to be lower tier. Like, for where your noise comes from, you need to be next to the pitch. Yeah. So it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad up there. I would say. I mean, ultimately, everyone wants there to be one singing section, and it to be the whole ground, but that's never going to happen. And the board, when reconfiguring the ground at various points in the 90s, they put the family stand in the Stretford end, they put executive boxes in the Stretford end, and that definitely had a negative impact on the atmosphere. Yeah. I think that there is now, I would say that what they've got now they've got a singing section in J Stand, which is in the corner there. I stopped going to Old Trafford after the Glazers took it over in 2005, but it's very obvious. And I think particularly in the smaller games where there are more tickets available in that for kids, and people can go and stand with their mates, as they would at an away game where just people go where they want, more or less. And that's one of the reasons you get such a good atmosphere, and one of the reasons United fans give such a good atmosphere, because apparently it's not like that for everyone, where people just go and stand where they want, people actually go to their seats. Yeah. But what you want is as many like-minded people standing together as you can. And I would say what they've done now in J Stand, you can notice the difference. And I think what's also good at Old Trafford is, everyone bitches about the atmosphere at Old Trafford, but is that the away fans are also close to the pitch. And because, I'm really glad that they changed the rules about that now. Because it used to be the case that you usually, as an away fan, you'd go behind the goal. And then sometimes you get moved to the side. I remember when Martin O'Neill was manager at Villa. He arranged for the away fans to move down the side because he thought that usually in the second half, when the away side were attacking their own fans, that would be a disadvantage to his team. Not really sure what that said about the mentality of his players, but they've since, and then you go to some other places like Sunderland moved you to the upper tier. Newcastle, I mean, you're basically watching that game from Durham, and they've now changed the rules so that there has to be away fans at pitch level, but somehow Newcastle have still got away with it at this point. But I mean, yeah, you don't want there to be a singing section. Calling it a singing section sounds twee, but the atmosphere needs to come from somewhere. And if you've got 2,000 people who are going to sing for 90 minutes, then if you can put them all together, there's not a doubt that is going to make it better.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's contagious, that kind of thing. And it's also, I mean, it was interesting is that now United have been just shit again. The atmosphere has in some ways got better because I think when the football's good, you're in a position to sit there and wait for it to happen. And you know that it's going to happen. And the players don't need you as much. But I would say that they've been, since United turned shit, and it's been quite a long time now, the atmosphere at Old Trafford and the atmosphere away is also, I don't think they've got worse. And they might have even got better.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. So you touched on the Glazers there. So I know, the majority of not all United fans want the Glazers out. Do you see a world where the Glazers walk away from the club? And if so, what do you think it'll be that eventually makes them part ways?
Well, I think the stories are that when they first took over, they were thinking about actually not completing the takeover because they were made to fear for their personal safety. Okay. That is one way. That's not going to happen. Like, if that was going to happen, it would have happened then. Didn't happen then. It's not going to happen now. And I'm not saying this. I'm not making any value judgments here about that is a bad thing, that is a good thing, but I'm just talking like facts. Yeah. Like, if you fear for your personal safety, that will affect how you behave. That's not going to happen now. And now the only other way is, unless there's a crazy recession that means that they can't afford to pay some of the loan repayments, or that they get an offer of such incredible magnitude that they can't reject it. But ultimately, as a United supporter, as a football fan, as a fucking human being, I hope that doesn't happen, because the only people who are likely to be able to buy the Glazers out are people that shouldn't be allowed anywhere near football or anything else for that matter. And the Glazers have taken over £1 billion out of United. And it's worked out for us also worse than we would have thought, because the two best teams now are our two main rivals. So when United were winning everything in sight in the 90s, you will know as a Liverpool fan that you could hope that Chelsea won the league, or you could hope that Arsenal won the league. Yeah. But as a United fan, we don't have that. Every season begins with damage limitation. So I would say that when Liverpool got good, I initially wanted City to win the league because Liverpool hadn't won the league since 1990. I was happy for that to continue. But then once City had two in a row, like last summer, I actually changed my opinion. I was like, well, actually, if City win 3 in a row, then that conversation about who the greatest English team of all time is City can be part of that conversation. Yeah. Whereas with only 2 in a row and no Champions Leagues, I would say I understand. I mean, I know people would argue it, but United have got 2 teams that won 3 leagues in a row. The only teams that have done that are those United teams, and they also won the Champions League in that run. I don't really see that any sensible argument about who the greatest English club, at least in the Premier League era, can be, is anyone other than one of those 2 teams, and everyone else fighting for 3rd place. So when it was City and Liverpool last season, I was thinking, well, actually, I changed my mind. I feel like I prefer it to be Liverpool this time, because I dislike them both equally. So it becomes about context and circumstance. But yeah, so now, City have owners who've put over £1 billion in, and United have owners who've taken over £1 billion out. But if you offered me United's owners or City owners, I'm still going United's owners, because ultimately football is extremely important, but it's not that important. And I don't change my morals. I don't change the things about life and humanity in the world that I think are important based on what stuff I want my football team to win. And ultimately, and I would much prefer some horrible bastard owners who've taken all this money out of the club and who have given money to Donald Trump's campaign, versus City's owners who preside over human rights abuses and are terrible plutocrats. So, yeah, I mean, it's not great, is it?
No.
But here we are. And ultimately, yeah, it's the government, and it shouldn't even be like we blame the PLC for selling to the Glazers, and Fergie has a part in that for pissing off Cornwall over the Rock of Gibraltar, so that the Rock of Gibraltar sold to the Glazers. Like, those guys are responsible for this, and we blame the Premier League and the FA, who should never have allowed these people into our game. But also the government have a massive responsibility because, and it's the same we're seeing it in different area now, and we're seeing clubs going bust. Football clubs, and all the football clubs, from the biggest to the smallest, are community assets that belong to the people, and they need to have special status in law that means that not any old person can come and buy them. And United supporters have been let down in the same way that Newcastle supporters were let down in Mike Ashley, in the same way that Leyton Orient supporters were let down, in the same way that Leeds supporters were let down. And there's an extensive list of scumbags that have been allowed to buy our football clubs and have left them in various states of ruin and disrepair. And and that extends also to people like Roman Abramovich, another extremely unpleasant individual who has put money into a football club, but he's not done it because he loved the romance of Chelsea FC, and he grew up watching Peter Osgood and Hutchinson and David Webb and all these guys. Football ultimately, it changes society, but it mainly reflects society. And what we see in football is what we see everywhere if we open our eyes and look around.
So coming away from the Glazers now, what are you most excited about as a United fan going forward now?
There's a saying, Matt Busby said, there's nothing on earth like being a Red. And that is something I will always feel, however good or bad United are.
Yeah.
Because going to the game it still represents like my family heritage, my relationship with my dad, mates that I have who I would never have met if it wasn't going to the game. Even if we'd have known each other as kids, we may or may not have been mates, but with whom I've shared some of the greatest times and the greatest nights of my life. And it's the anticipation of all those things and the representation of all those things. And the things in my mind, like, everyone has an image in their mind of what they think their football club represents. And it might represent that to just them, or it might represent that to everyone. And I think about the things that I've learned watching United, whether it's being a 15-year-old at Selhurst Park in 1995, watching Eric Cantona jump in and boot Matthew Simmons, and thinking as someone who's trying to understand themselves and the world, thinking, always be true to yourself, whatever the consequences. Or Matt Busby talked about the rebelliousness of youth and how he wanted United to encapsulate that. And all those things, those values of flair, of not giving a shit, of taking the piss, of being brave, like taking brave options, of the things that I learned from United, things that I love about United, and things that I want to see from United in the future. And looking at where United are going now, I would say I feel more positively about United than I have since 2013, because I feel like we don't know what players managers going to be allowed to buy, but they look much closer to a team than they have at any time since Fergie left.
So finally, the podcast is centered around going the match. So with every podcast we're doing, I want to end by asking what are your top 3 favourite matches you've been to. So it doesn't have to be based on the 90 minutes itself. It can be something happened during the day or whatever it may be.
Okay, this is difficult. I've seen United win two Champions Leagues. So, and the first of those was to complete the treble. So, I mean, it's very hard to ignore May 1999. So I guess I've got. This is not a 1, 2, 3, but it's interesting. My dad. He's retired now. But he was a school teacher, and so the first three Champions League finals I went to, my dad couldn't come because he was teaching. But the fourth one, where we got absolutely walloped by Barcelona, my dad was there, and the moment when Wayne Rooney equalised, getting to celebrate that goal with my dad in the Champions League final is up there with John Terry falling on his arse and Ole Solskjaer's winner. But I am going to go. I'm going to pick one Champions League final. I'm going to pick the first one. I'm going to pick 1999. The reason I'm going to pick that is partly because it completed the treble, which is the greatest achievement by any English club. I've been equal. I mean, it's up there with Celtic doing it in 1967. But arguably, you could say that Celtics is a better achievement because they did it with players entirely from Glasgow and its environs, and that will never happen again. But the United team that did it, it wasn't just that they won the treble, it was the manner in which they did it, with loads and loads of goals, loads of amazing goals, loads of young players from Manchester, superstars who came to represent more than football, like David Beckham. It was everything. So all the great United teams have more or less comprised some incredible cheap purchases. And that team had Peter Schmeichel, bought Dennis Irwin, bought for Ole Solskjaer, bought for bugger all, really. Some expensive signings, Dwight York, Jaap Stam, Roy Keane, and some homegrown talent. And that team encapsulated all those things. And the way that they played, they scored 6 goals against Barcelona. They score in that season. They won from 2-0 down away to Juventus in the European Cup semi-final, which I think is the greatest performance ever by a British club. To do that, to be 2-0 and an away goal down, and to come back and win, and to do it in the way that they did it is like nothing I've ever seen before. And then, it's ridiculous. No one needs me to tell them what happened at the end of the Bayern Munich game. But what also people I think don't realise about that team is that team lost the last time that team got beat that season was just before Christmas at home to Borough, and then they went the remainder of the season without losing a game in any competition, which incidentally is a longer run than Arsenal managed at any time in their invincible season. And they actually, the unbeaten run that went from that Borough game until they lost in about October the following season is the longest unbeaten run in all competitions of any team in any of the major European leagues. Yeah. But it's just, I'm talking all this bullshit about football, but the reality is also that I was 20. That was my first year at university. It was my first year of being in charge of my own football going, to the extent that I could afford to pay for it. And because I didn't grow up in Manchester, my mates growing up weren't Reds. So I went to that game on my own. I went to Barcelona on my own. I went to the game on my own. And I guess it's some kind of, or been elevated by my mind, by nostalgia, into some kind of rite of passage of going of that. So that's in my top 3. I'm also going to go with the last game of the 92-93 season when United were away to Wimbledon, where they basically United had won the league and they'd celebrated the league. I hadn't won the league for 26 years, which was all my childhood. I grew up with my dad bitching about the teams that I grew up loving because he'd seen United win everything, and then we were there together. The last game was at Selhurst Park, and United took over Selhurst Park. It was almost all United, and it was just amazing to be there, like the joy on people's faces, like people that were a lot longer in the tooth than me. I was 14, that had been all over, that had seen the disappointment. The season before, United had lost the league to Leeds at Anfield, and I wasn't there, but people that were there talk about seeing like grown fucking hard men crying, men who did not do a lot of crying as a matter of course. And I wasn't there, but I couldn't feel what it meant in the same way that those people, not just people who were there, but people that had lived through the last 25 years of watching United felt that day. But still now, I have watched United lose the league to City on the last day of the season, with City not having won the league since 1968, and I know what that felt like. But that was 13 league titles and 2 European Cups later. That was nowhere near as bad as what happened in that day in May 1992. So to then come back and win it the next year, and with Eric Cantona as well, was just amazing just to be there. But there was a moment with probably about an hour gone, and Brian Robson had been, he hadn't been a regular that season, but he was playing that day, and everyone made a big performance. In the previous game, United played Blackburn. They were winning 2-1. They got a free kick in the last minute. And then Gary Pallister was the only player of the first team that hadn't scored that season. So he goes up to take the free kick, and what the fuck, he scores. but amazing. But Brian Robson also, he wasn't in the first team. He used to he'd come on and help them close out games basically by keeping the ball and kicking people. And he hadn't scored that season. And then after about an hour, probably it was, like just an aimless punt goes downfield, and what the fuck, Robson's through. And I remember my dad and I clutching each other, and Brian Robson's life's work had been trying to make United win the league. Like, he could have gone to any team in the world because he was that good, but he stayed. I mean, probably partly because it wasn't really done at that point so much. Like, I mean, occasionally English players did go to Italy, but that was mainly it, and none of them really, most of them anyway, not none of them. Like Mark Haley did well in Italy, Ray Wilkins did okay in Italy, but mainly it didn't work. And so Brian Robson's going through, and me and my dad clutched each other because it's like he's through on goal. Like, there's nothing that can stop this happening, and he scores. And watching someone like, for me, like Brian Robson encapsulated everything about United until that point. Was encapsulated to something sent by Brian Robson, and watching him complete his life's work and have that moment and to celebrate that moment with my dad. So I think in my mind, I've sort of set that as like some kind of passage from my childhood to my teenage years, from United never winning the league to United almost always winning the league, to thinking about football in a different way. I remember on the platform at Selhurst Park after that game, found Red Issue on the floor, and it was fanzine. And that was the first fanzine that ever paid me to write as well. The first people ever, and I'm now a writer. And just everything about that day will always be extremely special. And I think the one more, I've got to go and pick my nipper up from school in a second, so I'm going to waffle less with this one. But I guess I was kind of thinking about going for a Euro away to Lyon, where you just have those Euro aways where everything just fits. Like, all your mates are there. You do the perfect amount of pre-match eating and then boozing to make sure that you're belted for the game, but not so belted you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
United scored in the last minute. We celebrated with Lewis Sahar's mum and sister because they were there, and then we had a great night out afterwards. Just everything worked. But I then remembered that I was going to go for that one. And in the course of talking, I remembered that I've got to go for Eric Cantona at Selhurst Park, where the relationship the United supporters had with Eric Cantona was something unusual, I would say, where you get these footballers occasionally who represent something more than themselves. They represent something more than the team. They represent some ideas about being. And all of that was encapsulated in Eric Cantona. He was everything I love about United, everything I wanted United to be. He was big, he was strong, he had a flair, imagination, bravery, daring, and he was cool as fuck. Yeah. He's someone, there's certain people that no one would argue. Like, Liverpool fans might hate Cantona, but no one is telling you that Cantona is not cool. And it's the same, a different way now, Marcus Rashford. Whatever you think about him as a player, Marcus Rashford's a hero. And no one's going to argue with that. And it was like that with Cantona. And, I went to Jewish school. We used to have to wear kippah on our heads, like a Jewish thing. And I had Tipex 7 Cantona on mine. And I used to walk around school with like the lapels of my blazer turned up, like 7 Cantona chalked on the back, all that bullshit. And the summer after he booted Matthew Simmons, I did probably my most stupid Eric-related piece of activity, where I was on holiday after my GCSEs, and I was in Israel, and I decided on the last day of my holiday, I had this brainwave. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put plasters on my chest in the shape for number 7, and then I'm going to go on the beach in the middle of the summer in Israel without sun cream. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to burn myself to absolute fuck, and I'm going to have a number 7 basically tattooed on me without actually getting a tattoo. So I did. And it hurt a lot. But at no point did I think I shouldn't have done that. Because Eric Cantona was, as I said, like all those things that I thought were important, not just about United, but about existing. And it was encapsulated by that night with Matthew Simmons, where he was walking off the pitch after he'd been sent off. Someone shouted shit at him that he didn't like. He was like, okay, let's have it. And I say that I felt like I said, let's have it, like I'm someone that's ever fucking said, let's have it to anyone. I have not. I've never been in a fight.
But he just embodied everything you wanted about you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that if I say certain shit to someone, I might get a tickle. And I don't particularly see why being on the other side of the fence at a football match should mean that doesn't happen. If there's a footballer walking past me and I start talking smack about his mum and he gives me a right hand, what am I going to say? Nothing. But I think the thing about what Eric did was that it was, as I mentioned earlier, it's that lesson of be true to yourself, whatever the circumstances, and you won't go too far wrong in your life. And that was what I ultimately thought about from that and what I still think about from that. And that season, United lost the league by a goal and they lost the cup final by a goal as well. If Cantona doesn't do that, doesn't jump into the crowd, then United probably win the league, you would think. And in theory, they won it again the next season and again the season after that. That would be 5 in a row. No one's ever done that. And they would have also won, let's say they won the double, and they won the double the season before and the season after, 3 doubles in a row. But I would not exchange what Eric did that night for any of those trophies, because football is about stuff that's more than football. And that moment is one of my favourite moments in all the years I've been watching United, and I'm absolutely certain that it always will be.
And that's a fantastic way to finish the podcast, mate. So before you go, just a massive thank you for giving up your time and coming on. Really appreciate it, mate.
Oh, not at all. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
If you haven't already, please subscribe, follow and share. And of course, leave a 5-star rating.